There's a quiet blankness that follows survival. Not fear, not shock, just a still mental gray. Like your thoughts have been wrapped in tissue paper so they don't make noise. That's where I'll begin. Before I continue my story, tell me this. Would you still call it love if the other side was quietly calculating your exit? Share your honest opinion in the comments. I truly want to hear your perspective. My name is Sarah Davies. I'm 34 years old. I work as a mid-level HR analyst at a logistics tech firm. And 3 months ago, my world quietly turned inside out. I used to be married. Legally, I still am, though that word now feels like a faint watermark on a document I no longer relate to. Emotionally, that marriage is gone. It dissolved like a postcard left out in the rain. There was no screaming, no cinematic argument scene, just the slow realization that the person who once memorized the pattern of freckles on my shoulder blade was privately drafting a scenario where I quietly ceased to exist. I didn't know it at the time, but looking back, the clues weren't loud. They were small, flat, almost administrative. Because I wasn't a beloved partner. I was a number. A benefit amount, a claim value, $250,000, printed in a policy pocket I never even mentioned at home because I assumed it simply existed in the background, like most HR coverage does. I think what numbed me most was recognizing that I wasn't betrayed in a surge of emotion. I was priced. Indexed. He didn't lose control. He planned control. And now I'm here, 3 months later, speaking this into a recorder in a small room that still smells faintly of hotel-grade coffee creamer. My voice is steady only because everything inside me is muted. I'm not telling this because I need sympathy. I'm telling this because silence is how outcomes get written without the victim's handwriting. I'm telling this so that you can draw strength from the heartbreak I experienced, from the one I once used to call my home. I survived. Not by destiny, not by luck, but because somewhere inside me, the part of me that writes tiny affirmations on Post-it notes every morning, refused to surrender the narrative. I won't bury this. I will narrate it. Because silence is how predators win. And I've had enough of being understood only in hindsight. Before everything broke, my life looked ordinary. Not glamorous, not cinematic, just quietly structured in the way people convince themselves normal is a synonym for safe. I would wake up most mornings before the alarm went off, not because I was anxious, but because my internal rhythm liked predictability. I'd sit at the small dining table by the window where the light always seemed softer in the first 40 minutes after sunrise. I would write one sentence in my pocket affirmation planner. Always one sentence, never a paragraph. It kept me grounded. It made me feel like intentions mattered. My husband would walk into the kitchen around 7:10 on most days. His schedule was consistent, almost mechanically consistent, But at the time, I interpreted that as admirable discipline. He would reach for the same navy mug, pour coffee, add precisely 2 teaspoons of sugar, never one, never 1.5, and then he'd kiss the side of my head and say, "Morning." Not affectionate, not hostile, almost like punctuation. Back then, I thought we were simply introverted together. Our suburb wasn't affluent. It wasn't run down either. It was in that median space where porch lights still flickered on automatically at sunset, and people brought their trash cans in at reasonable hours. We weren't the kind of neighborhood that had barbecues every weekend. More like the kind where neighbors waved across lawns but rarely stepped closer. A polite, arm's-length geography of lives. I had friends at work, not close friends, but good conversational colleagues. We had a shared Slack channel where we exchanged jokes about HR survey responses and corporate jargon. One of them, Denise, always said she could read people. She claimed she had a special radar for intentions. I used to smile at that, not mockingly, but because I assumed she was exaggerating for effect. If anyone had asked me back then whether I believed people were secretly capable of cold manipulation, I would have probably said something like, "Most people are decent, they just make bad choices when stressed." I was naive, but not in the wide-eyed way people imagine. I was naive in the quiet, trusting way, the way that assumes the absence of chaos is evidence of stability. I didn't grow up with money. My parents worked ordinary jobs, library shelving and small auto parts retail. We weren't poor. We just operated inside a practical reality where expenses had to make sense. My life insurance policy, the one through work, was something I treated like a seatbelt. You're glad it exists, but you don't think about it unless something catastrophic has happened.
I never once thought that paperwork could turn into motive. My husband was charming in public. That was what everyone commented on. His calm posture, the way he spoke slowly, how he gave full attention to whomever was talking. He was steady. People trusted steadiness. Even I did. He had the exact kind of voice that sounds safe in bank commercials. We didn't fight loudly. We had quiet disagreements, mostly about schedules, responsibilities, minor logistics. Who would handle the grocery run? Whether we should upgrade the dishwasher now or later. Which weekend to visit his sister. There was nothing cinematic in our tension. It was the kind of faint misalignment that couples joke about, not the kind that sets off alarms. Sometimes I look back and think, the danger wasn't hidden behind drama. It was hidden behind normal. Every once in a while, I would catch him watching me in a way I couldn't interpret. Not affectionate, not resentful, more like someone evaluating something. But I'd blink and the expression would be gone. And because I didn't live with suspicion, I never stored those moments anywhere meaningful in my memory. They just evaporated like background noise. My happiest moments were simple ones. Grocery store trips late at night when aisles were empty, walking through home goods sections and imagining future spaces we might decorate. We used to stand in the blanket aisles joking about thread counts. Looking back, I realize those were the moments I projected safety onto him. I thought a man who took time choosing fabric textures must also take time choosing moral clarity. I realize now, attention to detail doesn't always equal care. On weekends, we often ate dinner on the couch. I'd have a bowl of pasta or soup. He'd have whatever pre-made meal he heated up. We would watch documentary series about financial crimes, stories about insurance scams, Ponzi schemes, offshore accounts. I would comment on how irrational people must be to risk everything for money. He would never comment. He would just watch quietly. I never realized I was watching case studies of his worldview. Work gave my life a predictable structure: quarterly reviews, onboarding cycles, mandatory trainings, annual benefits renewal. I approached HR like a puzzle. How do you interpret people's behaviors through policy, structure, incentives? That was my comfort zone. Logic, not manipulation. I never believed in reading people's true motives. I thought that was pretentious. Maybe that's why it blindsided me so deeply. Because I never learned to imagine that someone could look at me and see numbers instead of a partner. My life before the fall was a life where I genuinely assumed that if you showed up reliably, and you communicated respectfully, and you kept things organized, the universe would exchange your consistency with stability. I never considered that someone might use my stability as their camouflage. That numbness I spoke about earlier, the one that sets in after survival, it didn't begin the night everything revealed itself. It began long before, quietly, without pain, in the subtle places where I stopped noticing his distance because I mistook absence of conflict for presence of peace. I lived in a quiet suburb, with a quiet routine, with a quiet marriage. And I had no idea that quiet can be a mask, not a comfort. I had no idea that someone could be waiting for an opportunity, not a connection. And I had no idea that one ordinary benefits policy, the one I never thought twice about, was quietly becoming the center of a life I would soon need to reclaim from the edge of someone else's plan.
I think denial is the body's first panic anesthetic. Not courage, not strength, just the mind refusing to connect dots because connection would destroy the floor beneath you. The betrayal didn't arrive in one moment. It arrived in small fragments, a quiet accumulation of little inconsistencies I initially smoothed over as normal. My voice shakes when I try to reconstruct it now, not because I am reliving the danger, but because I am reliving the innocence I still had before I knew what that danger meant. It started with small shifts. He became more interested in my schedule than in our shared schedule. He would ask me which days I was working on-site versus remote, but with a tone that was completely flat, transactional. At the time, I interpreted it as logistics. Now I wonder how long had he been assessing my predictability. He started asking if I kept backup keys anywhere other than the kitchen drawer. At the time, I thought it was idle curiosity. Now I feel sick when I remember answering him calmly, as if that was harmless. But the moment that truly shook something loose inside me was this one. One night, we were watching a documentary on insurance fraud, and the narrator said the sentence, "Most life insurance crimes are premeditated long before the victim realized they were being documented." He didn't blink. He didn't swallow. He didn't shift posture. He just stared, still, as if that sentence wasn't about tragedy, but about methodology. And I sat there, noodles softening in my bowl, feeling a chill I couldn't name. Why didn't I ask him what he was thinking in that moment? Why didn't I ask myself why his silence felt calculated? Sometimes I still ask myself that. But betrayal doesn't hit as an explosion. Betrayal is a slow-forming bruise. Then one day you press the surface and discover the entire inside has already hemorrhaged. One evening, I came downstairs quietly. I had forgotten my planner on the table. He didn't hear me. He was sitting there, phone angled, speaking in a low tone. Not affectionate, not hostile. The tone of someone reviewing logistics. I froze. Not because I suspected danger, but because the energy in the room felt in private, in a way marriage shouldn't feel private. He said the phrase, "No, that payout is guaranteed. That part isn't the variable." I remember gripping the stair railing. My fingers felt numb. Static filled my head. Not panic, just blankness. What payout? Whose payout? Why did his voice sound like a man confirming a transaction?
When he ended the call, he walked into the kitchen and his face was perfectly neutral. He smiled faintly, the same faint smile he always used, the polite, half-compassion, public smile, and he asked me if I wanted tea before bed. I said yes, because my brain still wanted normal. My brain still wanted safety. In that moment, I didn't think danger. I thought, maybe I misinterpreted. Maybe this is nothing. Isn't that how betrayal works? Isn't shock just the mind trying to postpone recognition? A few days later, we were having dinner, pasta again, and he casually asked if I ever updated my emergency contact information with HR. I asked him why, he asked. He said, flatly, just thinking about all the responsible things adults don't do until it's too late. Responsible things. Until it's too late. My fork felt heavy in my hand. My appetite disappeared. My heartbeat sped up, but it wasn't fear. It was the first crack of comprehension. What kind of spouse asks that with no warmth? What kind of husband frames mortality like a box to check on a to-do list? 2 days after that, I overheard him in the garage, the door was slightly open, saying something in a fast undertone. "No," I said, "I don't want any traceable amateurs." His voice was sharp, focused, not emotional. Who was he talking to? Why did he sound like a man negotiating criteria? Why did he talk about traceability? My breath cut in my throat. I remember whispering to myself, almost silently, this isn't happening. Isn't denial a strange instinct? Why didn't I walk away right then? Why didn't I confront him? But when you are mid-betrayal, your mind does not assume crime.
It assumes miscommunication. Your mind protects you by clinging to a version of reality you can tolerate. My hands trembled that entire night, not because I was scared of him, but because I was scared of what it might mean if I was right. When you love someone, or think you love someone, your mind will do anything to avoid the idea that they could be structuring your absence. But the biggest betrayal moment wasn't any of those. The biggest betrayal moment was a single, painfully ordinary sentence. We were walking through the grocery store, cereal aisle, bright fluorescent lighting, no soundtrack, no tension, nothing cinematic, and he said, "You should update your HR portal soon. You never know what could happen." No tone, no inflection. Just a statement. A statement that, in hindsight, was a countdown, hidden inside casual conversation. Who says that to someone they love? Who frames another person's mortality like a box to check on a to-do list? Isn't that the moment where a heart should have shattered? Isn't that the moment where my future already started dissolving? I think that was the exact moment, the precise point in time where betrayal stopped being theoretical and became structural. He wasn't reacting. He wasn't tempted by sudden impulse. He was planning. And that realization, that quiet, bone-deep realization, is what began the real heartbreak. Because betrayal is not the moment you are harmed. Betrayal is the moment you realize you were never loved in the first place. Discovery is a slow, unsettling rearranging of what you thought reality was. The night everything aligned, it didn't feel cinematic. It felt procedural, almost like I was an employee reviewing data in a file that didn't belong to me. It began with a notification. I had come home late, not intentionally. Work had a compliance training rollout crash, and I stayed to help the IT liaison troubleshoot because 3 departments' portal access had defaulted to archived status. When I walked in the house, the lights were off. The living room was silent. The kitchen was silent. The entire home had the same stillness as an empty hotel hallway. And there, on the dining table, was his phone. Face down, not charging, unlocked. I don't know how to explain what happened next because I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious in an active sense. It was more like something inside me simply turned and faced a direction I had been avoiding. I remember staring at it, just staring, for what felt like a full minute. I remember thinking, if there is nothing there, then looking won't change anything. And then, if there is something there, then not looking won't keep me safe. Isn't that a terrifying shift? My hand wasn't shaking. It was almost strangely steady. That numb steadiness again. The same quiet, chemical calm I'd felt after the near attack and in the hospital. I tapped the screen. Messages opened, but not the default app. A separate, encrypted chat app was sitting open. A thread was visible. My brain didn't read the entire conversation. It locked on to a few phrases, and those phrases were enough to remove any remaining oxygen from my lungs. I don't remember breathing. I don't remember blinking. I only remember my consciousness flattening into something very still, the way a monitor line goes flat in medical dramas before the alarm. There were other messages, older ones, about maintaining alibi clarity. One even referenced the insurance value amount. I saw the number, my number, spelled out like a line item on a procurement form. That was the moment I couldn't deny anything anymore. There was no interpretation available that wasn't lethal in implication. I closed the phone quietly, not angrily, just mechanically. Then I walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the cold tile floor because my legs didn't feel like legs anymore. They felt like the memory of legs. I whispered to myself, barely audible. One sentence. He was already gone. Because that's what the discovery truly was. Not discovering danger. It was discovering absence. The man I thought I married was imaginary. The man behind him was someone who saw me as a transaction. After sitting there for what must have been an hour, I stood slowly, washed my face with cold water, and stared at myself in the mirror. My face looked neutral, not devastated, not panicked, just blank, like someone had erased expression. I think that expression was acceptance. I walked back out, put the phone exactly where it had been, and sat on the edge of the couch. My body was cold. Not temperature cold, but the kind of internal cold that comes from losing the implied contract of safety. Later that night, I called my retired police neighbor. Not to reveal anything, just to talk about neutral topics. Hearing another voice grounded me. He didn't know what he was doing in that moment, but he was anchoring a sinking ship. Over the next few days, I began quietly documenting. Not dramatically, just small notes, date references, tiny observations. I didn't confront him, not because I was scared of conflict, but because I realized something essential. Confrontation gives a predator a timeline. Discovery, silently held, gives the survivor the advantage. And so I didn't tell him I knew. I acted normal as I could, while inside my worldview was rearranging itself around a fact I couldn't reverse. He had constructed a plan for my elimination. He had negotiated logistics. He had verified financial incentive. This wasn't emotional betrayal. This was administrative betrayal, contractual betrayal. And when betrayal is that cold, the only way to respond is with clarity. There is a moment in survival where you go from being someone who reacts to someone who strategizes. I crossed that threshold when I realized this. He did not care if I existed. He cared if the policy paid. From that moment, my emotional reaction stopped being heartbreak. It became calibration. He had a plan. Now I would need one. There is a strange kind of calm that comes after the worst thing possible becomes undeniable. Fear turns into something else. It becomes design. People don't talk about that part, but it's real. There's the shock stage, then the grieving stage, and then the architectural stage. And it was in this architect state that the plan began. I didn't act impulsively. Impulse is what gets you caught.
Impulse is what exposes knowledge too soon. Impulse is what gives the villain a head start. No, this plan needed to be quiet, delayed, timed, controlled, and non-reactive. So the first step wasn't confront him. No, confrontation would have given him the alert that his window of advantage was closing. The first step was behave as if nothing was discovered. It was the hardest part emotionally, but the most necessary strategically. Because if he realized I had seen the messages, he would accelerate implementation, maybe even course correct and attempt a new method. Silence, from my side, was the only shield. I cleaned the kitchen, as usual. I asked him about his day the same way as always. I sat next to him during our Friday streaming routine like everything was normal, even though I was mentally dissecting every line of his facial tension. My voice remained calm. My eyes did not flicker. Masking became a protective art form. But make no mistake, the interior fortification was in full operation. On my days off, strategically spaced apart, I began the real work. Not emotionally, legally, financially, digitally. First, I needed corroboration without accessing his device again. Why? Because if anything synced off, logged off, or mysteriously marked as viewed, I risked detection. So I began with institutional cross-checks. I confirmed the policy number through my own digital file. I confirmed the beneficiary designation with the insurance portal login I owned myself. I confirmed the payout clause terms, specifically the accelerated trigger conditions. The numbers matched. The payout timeline matched. The accidental death clause matched. This wasn't paranoia. This was structure. I quietly collected original IDs that were mine. Passport, birth certificate, old documents. I placed them in an envelope, then inside a shoebox, then placed that shoebox in the trunk of my car under the lining mat. I bought a prepaid SIM, not to use, but to have. I stored cash, not much, but liquid enough to relocate myself if I had to vanish for 48 hours. This wasn't running away. This was securing safe mobility. Villains win when the target is immobile. I would not be. This part was the single clever piece most people would never imagine. I wrote an email to myself with a doc link containing the outline of the evidence timeline. Unsent, drafted, saved in the cloud. Then I added one line at the top. This document auto-shares if this account goes inactive for 14 days. I set a rule in the email platform, a last will digital release. This way, if I ever disappeared or got accidentally harmed, that document would forward automatically to multiple recipients I pre-designated. One coworker, one attorney, one extended cousin. He would not get away with it. This step alone meant that even if I never survived to tell the story, the truth would. This was the psychological kill shot. Not physically, but in terms of advantage dynamic. He had planned around my usual patterns. So I began disrupting those patterns. Very slowly, so he could not tell it was behavioral. I changed my gym hour. I changed my route home. I changed which grocery I used. I began parking in front of different neighbors' houses. Anyone looking at my movements would see chaos, not predictability. And predators require patterns. Let him wait.
Let him sit with incomplete risk factors. Let him overcalculate. A frustrated clock is a delayed crime. I knew this would come down to a particular moment. He would eventually stage something. He had to. Momentum requires action. I did not need to rush. I did not need to accelerate. I simply needed to be ahead when he chose his method. So I arranged something silently, a tiny precursor, a single, simple chess piece. I set up location sharing with my retired neighbor for jogging safety and never deactivated it. He didn't know what he was agreeing to. He just said, "Sure, no problem." But that one act meant that if my location suddenly stopped moving in an irregular place, he would call someone. It meant I had a witness, unintentionally, who would be the first point of alert. The mental part, this part, is hard to verbalize. You gradually become someone else. Not evil, not vengeful, but strategically evolved. You become quiet steel. You become someone who recognizes love is no longer in the equation. Safety is the new access. I still slept next to him. I still laughed at dinner. I still said good night. But I was no longer his wife. I had become his mirror. I was distraught. Everything he thought he was planning, I had already pre-disrupted by simply refusing to be predictable. And that was the plan. No dramatic confrontation. No emotional declaration. No cinematic meltdown. No. The plan was to hollow out his blueprint until his blueprint had nothing to connect to. Because when you ruin a predator's geometry, you ruin his execution. I wanted to gradually destabilize him. My plan for revenge and retribution wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was so quiet that it was indistinguishable from ordinary life. You'll understand in a second. Because the moment of justice did not begin on some dramatic night. It began in something painfully boring. A quarterly dental appointment, a 2:20 p.m. slot, a standard check, the kind of event no one prepares sabotage for. He thought he had the advantage of surprise, but I had the advantage of patience. So when he suggested that we take one car to save gas, I agreed, with no hesitation at all. That was his signal that I was still predictable. He needed me to seem unmodified. I remained numb in front of him, but interiorly, I carried a single sentence like a razor. I refuse to die confused. The dental office was 23 minutes away, and exactly 9 minutes into the drive, he suggested we check out the scenic detour route. He said it as if he was just making casual small talk. But I could feel the internal script in his tone. There was that slight tightening in his jaw. He was aligning the setup. He took a left turn instead of the usual right, and we entered a more rural mile. Trees, sparse homes, less witnesses. I didn't panic. I didn't ask why. I didn't raise suspicion. I just silently unlocked my phone and, without him noticing, double-tapped my lock screen twice. That's all. That double tap pinged my location to the neighbor. I didn't need to speak. Information was already on the move. And that was revenge step 1. The second step happened 4 minutes later. The turn we took led to a small decline. He slowed the car slightly more than normal. I knew this part wasn't an accident because this exact stretch of road
had a single known hazard, a drainage slope on the right, steep enough to cause serious damage if a tire slipped. He couldn't stage it in a city street. He had to stage it here because the physics would explain everything. At least to someone who knew nothing. But I knew everything. And while he gripped the wheel with that subtle adrenaline stiffness, I stayed so still that he turned slightly toward me to read my face. He wanted fear. He needed fear. He expected it. But I gave him something else. Nothing. Just numb. Emotionless. A face without panic. Because panic signals innocence, and innocence can be manipulated. But numbness? Numbness unnerves. He needed a frightened wife. Instead, he was sitting next to a forensic witness. Then, revenge step 3 arrived. I didn't react to the steering drift. He nudged the steering wheel a bit toward the slope. Slow. Measured. Testing my reflex. He wanted me to gasp, or reach for something, or show awareness. Because his plan was to blame panic. To say later, she grabbed the wheel. I saw the script in his eyes. But I didn't grab. I didn't help him stage intent. I let silence be my weapon. And now he was trapped. Because to complete his plan, he would need to force the vehicle toward the slope, himself. And that would leave traceable micro-movements in steering force distribution, evidence that the contact originated from his side. That's when his pulse changed. He realized, too late, that the math wasn't aligning anymore. I had robbed him of his alibi. A sheriff deputy, just one, with flashing blue lights, pulled in from the opposite direction. Not because of me, not because of him, not because anyone called. Just coincidence. The kind of coincidence that destroys a criminal's timing. He panicked. He barely regained the wheel, almost overcorrecting, trying to re-enter the normal lane before being noticed. He forced a normal lane posture. He forced casual body language. The deputy didn't even stop. He just passed. No pause, no suspicion. But it was enough. The moment was dead. His perfect planned moment evaporated. He had waited months to align the right timing. And fate, or some higher algorithm, ruined his scene with a single stray vehicle. The stage collapsed on him, right in front of me. And I didn't even blink. Silence had killed the assault.
Revenge step 5 was the exit. I calmly told him, "Let's reschedule. I don't feel well." I said it flat, muted, empty. He looked at me, not as a husband, but as a strategist whose blueprint was gone. And I saw the exact moment he knew that I knew. He didn't ask a single question. He didn't argue. He didn't insist we continue the drive. He simply turned the car around, stiff, defeated, aware that he'd lost the geometry. We got home. I went inside. I packed only the essentials. He watched. He didn't speak. There are no words for when someone tries to murder their wife, and she responds with perfect intellectual neutrality. He just froze. Because if I screamed, he could still manipulate narrative. If I cried, he could still gaslight. But silence? Silence means the case is already won. He never touched me again. He never threatened again. He never attempted a second window. Because predators don't attempt when they suspect a camera is already running. And that's the revenge. I didn't need to harm him. I needed to make sure, permanently, that he would never harm me. And to do that, all I had to do was remove his conditions for control. That is the purest revenge there is. I slid into calmness by choice, and in that calm I found a strange, steady courage, the kind that arrives when you remove someone's map and watch them lose their way. Destabilizing him didn't make me cruel. It made me whole again. And in that wholeness, I felt the first honest pulse of peace.
After the car turned back toward home, everything changed in small, practical ways. I moved a few things from the house into a storage unit that only I could access. I met with an attorney who specialized in family and insurance disputes. I arranged for a trusted friend to be present at key moments when paperwork needed signing. Each logistical act felt less like revenge and more like reclamation, a series of tiny affirmations that my life belonged to me again. Therapy became part of that reclamation. At first, my sessions were about containment, how to sleep without rehearsing scenarios, how to let my body stop scanning doorways. Later, we talked about identity. I discovered that survival leaves a different terrain. You are both the person who endured and the person who must learn to expect safety again. I learned the vocabulary of boundaries, how to say no without collapsing into guilt, how to let silence be a statement rather than a surrender. I also told my story publicly, but with intent and restraint. I prepared documentation, shared timelines with authorities and a small circle of allies, and then I chose the moments to disclose. When I finally spoke, measured, clear, and calm, people understood the difference between spectacle and disclosure. I wanted no hero's coronation, no sensational headlines. I wanted the truth to be a tool, not a trophy. Justice came in mundane, undeniable forms. An insurance audit prompted by the automated release I set in motion, questions from investigators who cared more about evidence than narratives, and ultimately procedural steps that showed his actions and intentions in ledger form. I did not dance on his ruin. I watched the system do what it was designed to do when given proper facts. Now, my mornings are simple again. I still write one sentence in my pocket planner, but the sentences have changed. They're quieter, less about hope as an abstract, more about steady things, a friend's call, a book that sits unopened, a walk where my shoulders don't ache from anticipation. There is a patience to this piece, not complacency, but a disciplined kindness toward myself. If there is a moral, it is not about punishment. It is about reclamation. It is about refusing to be someone's line item. It is about choosing steady action over performance, clarity over chaos, and dignity over spectacle. All these made me who I am today, a strong woman who has refused to let the betrayal reduce me, destroy me, or make me less of myself. You see, some circumstances we pass through sometimes make us believe we are unworthy, make us feel like we cannot come back stronger. That, my friend, is untrue. My story is a prime example that you can come back from anything. I did not allow the betrayal to make me become a shadow of myself or make me lose my resolve, because the mind is a powerful tool in the hands of whoever controls it. I didn't let mine be controlled by the manipulator. That, my friend, is strength and the purest form of revenge. I am Sarah Davis, and this is the story of how I survived, still here, still standing. If you drew strength from my story, stay with us, subscribe to Revenge Bible, and be notified of the next gripping transformation.